Oh, hey guys, and welcome to our next session on Wipro training. So, before we begin today's session, in the previous session, we looked at all the possible questions we can expect from the very basics that includes C as well as C++. Now, from basics, we'll move on to object oriented programming and look at the possible questions that we can expect from these kind of topics, particularly from object oriented programming in C and in Java, because object oriented programming is different in C compared to Java. Both are not the same. Both have different set of features, both have different set of functions, and some of them which are available in C are not available in C, which are available in C++ are not available in Java, and some features which are available in Java are, as expected, not available in C++. So let us go ahead with the basics of this. So the first thing we just need to know is what exactly is a class and what exactly is an object. So before going ahead, let's just look at the definitions of these, and then we'll go through our definitions in terms of practical aspects, and then we'll go through all these features and learn and understand how we utilize them, or what kind of interview questions you can expect and how to particularly answer those. So the basic point of classes and objects is that in C, you had something called structures. So using structures, you could create a user defined data type. You could create your own data type, which could be combination of any other data types like integer, float, and so on. But when we start using classes and objects, it's not just a data type anymore. A class, similar to a structure, doesn't only have variables as a part of it. A class, unlike a structure, can also have, along with variables, functions within it. So, in a structure, you created variable which had access to all the variables of the structure that you had created. Those we called as structure members. But in a class, a variable of a class type is called object, and this object will have access not only to the members, not only to the variables of that class, but also to the functions of the class. And these functions can be written any amount or any way, any type. So the major thing that we need to know is all the members of a class belong to object. By default, all the members, in other words, all the variables of a class belong to objects, whereas all the functions of a class belong to the function. Now, how exactly is this? Because when we talk about this, we always state that all the variables declared within a class belong to the objects, whereas all the functions declared within a class belong to the class. To understand this, I'm just going to take one small example for you all. So let's just take this for instance. Let's say we have a class called A in short, and always our habit is to write class beginning with an uppercase. And the major difference in terms of syntax for a class is in C++, you need to use semicolon at the end of class declaration or class definition. In Java, you do not need a semicolon at the end of it. This is only syntactically, nothing else. Now, within this class, let's say we have a variable int a and we create a function called void print, which is going to print the value, the variable that we have. So all that I'll print here is a, and just go to next line. Now, before going ahead with concept of classes and objects, we need to know one more thing that is within this. Since we have cout and endl, I'm just using namespace standard. Now, There's still one more thing that we just need to know in short about classes before going ahead. That is, every variable and function of a class belongs to a particular access specifier. I hope you all remember what access specifiers are. Which access specifiers do we have in C++? We have a few access specifiers in C++, or access modifiers as some would call them as well. So as pointed out, you have private, protected, and public. So the basic idea is, again, these are some simple questions that you may expect when it comes down to object-oriented programming. I'll just point this out. Object-oriented programming, you can expect questions as basic as how do some access specifiers work? Where can I use some access specifier in which particular real case scenario? Two, questions including a runtime polymorphism and the difference between runtime and compile time polymorphism. You can get questions on any topics of this. So it's good to know everything within this. So when we talk about access specifiers, there are three of them: private, protected, and public. I hope we all know this. Private basically means that all the variables and functions that are declared as private can only be accessed within the scope of the class. You can't access them outside the brackets of class. So we know this already. Private as in variables, or in other words, members and functions, can only be accessed within the scope of the class. Then we know what is protected as well. They can be accessed within scope of the class, but along with within the scope of the class, you can also access them subclasses as well by using subclasses. Whereas public, you can access them within a class, you can access them subclasses as well. Along with it, you can also access them by using objects. So you can access within the class, within subclasses, and using sorry. So I hope everyone's able to hear me better now. I think I had slight issue with the mic. That's all right. So let us go ahead with this. So we can access them within the class, within the subclass, as well as using objects of the class. So these are the three major things that we need to know when it comes down to these particular access specifiers. Now within this, there's one more point that you should know. A common interview question is, which is the strongest access specifier? Which do you think is the strongest access specifier? Which is the weakest access specifier? When you talk about strongest and weakest access specifiers, you can just observe this and get to know the strongest access specifier is the one which protects the variable the most, or which protects the function the most, and that is private. Having a private access specifier ensures that your variable or function is not accessible outside your class. So that is considered as the strongest access specifier. And the weakest, as we know, is public. By default, we know that all access specifiers, or by default, whatever variable or function, whatever member, variable, or data members of the class or functions of the class are private. Whether you write it or not, we know by default it's private. So we'll just make it public in our case. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that all variables belong to the objects, but all functions belong to class. Or in other words, you can also say all the data members belong to the objects, whereas all the functions belong to class. So the reason for that is, take an example, a1 comma a2. We have taken two objects of class A. Here, object a1 has its own copy of variable a. Object a2 has its own copy of variable a as well. So you've got two objects which access the same variable. No, both objects have different copy of the variable. They don't have the same copy. So a1 will have its own copy of variable a2 will also have its own variable a. So variables are different for both the objects. So variables belong to objects, whereas functions do not belong to objects. Functions instead belong to classes. These functions are the same whether a1 accesses them or whether a2 accesses them. The functions are the same. So the basic idea here is, objects have different data members, but class consists of the function. And if you call the class from object a1, it'll call, or it'll print a of a1. If you call the object, or if you call the function from object a2, it'll print the variable of object a2. Now, in this particular case, if you observe, how will this function get to know which object is calling it? Now, this is where you can expect a question in the following way. I'll just point this out. How does a function in a class get to know which object is calling it? Because we are not sending any object name. We are not sending here stating that a1 is calling this function print to print the value of a. We are not sending a1 from here. When I call print, I'm calling a1 dot print. So in the brackets, I'm not sending any data here for this to know that it is a1's a, not a2 objects a. So we can't get to know that directly. To get to know that, it is done using a hidden variable in C++. That hidden variable is called this. So there is a pointer called this. I hope everybody does remember this. Remember this as well, pun intended. So there's a pointer called this, which always is sent by the object when calling the function. So the basic idea works like this. When you have a1 dot print and a2 dot print, let's say, for example, I'm just taking one small scenario for us to work through this. Let's say we have a1 dot print and a2 dot print. Basically, we're calling print, but we're calling from a1 and a2 object. So this function should know that we are calling print from two different objects. For the function to know that we are calling print from two different objects, here's what the function basically does. It takes this particular data. In other words, in print function, it will automatically send address of the object that is calling the function. So here, by default, automatically, whether you send it or not, that's secondary. But by default, address of the object that is calling this function is always sent. Address of a1 and address of a2. This address of a1 is received here, or this address of a2 is received here. And we know that addresses are stored in pointers. Since addresses are stored in pointers, we receive them within a pointer variable here. We create our own pointer. Remember, this is of which type? It's of type A. So the pointer which receives this address, A1 is of type A. So the pointer that receives address of A1 should also be of type A. So by default, in every function of the type A, a pointer receives this address, and that pointer name by default is called this. So when you just write A, it knows A is belonging to an object and it automatically prints this arrow mark A. So that is why there is no difference whether you write just A or whether you write this arrow mark A. Both are essentially same. So That is the major concept to this pointer. So just to summarize, is a formal parameter within a function in class. By default, just remember this for now. By default, the pointer receives the address of the object calling the function. So this is your very basic concept of pointers. We're not going to go in depth within this. There's no need for us to do that, but it's just something we basically need to know. Now, before going ahead, let us just look at the definition of all of these. Now that we got to know just a good preview or a review, if you've already learned this, of classes and objects, we have learned on from basics how it exactly works. We will now go ahead or to the next part and learn what exactly are these. I'm just going to give a small introduction to these, and later on we'll go in depth within each of these. I'm just going to give one small introduction to these to begin with. So abstraction is basically to state that you are hiding some things. So the point of abstraction is hiding certain data and keeping certain data accessible. That's basically what abstraction means. Now, how do we define abstraction? How do we see abstraction in real life? How can we hide certain data and keep certain data accessible in real life? Think about this. In a class, keep something private, keep something else public. Whatever is private is basically hidden from the objects. Whatever is public is accessible from the objects. Now, to understand this best, let's take something like class called bank account. Now, in bank account, your salary or not salary, your account balance should always be private. Your debit and so on should always be private. So those should never be public. You should never have them disclosed to others. So if someone is calling a function from this class, if someone is calling a function called show balance, for example, then you can call the show balance function, which can show something like, let's just take this balance, int balance equals, let's say, 10. It's not a good balance, but let that be for now. So all that we're doing is in show balance, we're just printing this is the balance. That's it. Now, can I modify this? Can I just take the object A1 and modify balance equals 50 or something like that, or 5 50,000, 5 lakh, or anything like this? I can't, because it's a private variable. You can only access it within class. And unless you go inside the class and change this, you can't. So basically, you're hiding it from accessibility by the users. Users are given limited access to it through this function. If they ever ask in interviews, if it's ever asked, so you know object oriented programming, you will be saying yes. So they'll ask, then explain how abstraction works and explain it with an example. So these are the kind of examples you can take up. Abstraction with a simple example like this. Then the next thing is comes up as a topic in this is called encapsulation. Now, encapsulation, as the name suggests, comes from the word capsule. Now, as the name suggests, in capsule, you guys know that there are things binded together. There are things together in a single coating, in a single covering. That is basically a capsule. So same thing goes even here in encapsulation. All that you have here is in a single capsule, instead of having many vitamins or minerals or something like this, here you have data members and functions. You can have many members and many functions together within one covering called a class. This one class can have many variables or data members and many functions together. Together, they are bound as a single entity or a single element called class. So you can take up any example of how a class works. You can take up any example like in case of a bank account, let's say if it's a class, everything is encapsulated within it. You cannot go outside of this class to perform something. Balance is there, show balance is there, or add balance, or say anything, provide show interest, or whatever function you want to check, um, or fund transfer, whatever function you want to check, you can just create all those functions within this class. And this class is a single entity, single capsule, under which you have every variable and function required to build the class. So that's basically called encapsulation. There's nothing complicated about it. I hope that's simple, easy, and clear for us to understand. So I hope that's clear. Any questions, I would always ask you to just post it up. We'll try answering as quickly as possible. So, going ahead from this, encapsulation, just remember the basic point. You're wrapping data members and functions together in a single entity, which is called a class. That's basically it. Now, let's go ahead from here over to the next thing called inheritance. Now, before going to inheritance, let me first point out what is data binding. So, when you talk about data binding, see, think about this. In an app, you have a user interface as well as a backend logic, or we also call it as business logic, or you can just call it as logic. This, let's just call it as UI. Now, the concept of data binding is that your UI, user interface, and back end logic should be bound together. In short, what it states is that any changes made in the logic should reflect in the UI. Any changes made through UI should also reflect in logic. That is basically it. So, all that it states is, if you have in object oriented programming any function like this, and you make some changes within this function, you make uh, you increase the balance, you decrease the balance, you perform anything you like. So once you perform them, it should be reflected onto your user interface when I call show balance. If I have one more function called update balance here, and I update a balance using a function, using a UI as in, I'm talking about text user interface here, character user interface, not graphical user interface. If I just call the function here by a menu driven approach, and if I update something, and that update, that business or logic update will should later on be visible for me in UI, because it should be updated in the logic as well. So that basically is data binding. Your UI and logic must be bound together. Changes made anywhere should be reflected in the other place. That's basically it. Nothing else to it. So logic and UI should be bound together. Any changes in data within done at backend or in logic section should be reflected within the user interface. That's basically what it means. But now let's go on to the two most important part followed by this. That is inheritance and polymorphism. Now, you may have observed and remembered that there are huge number of questions that are generally asked when it comes down to these topics. What exactly are these questions that you may expect, and what are they, and how to answer them? So to understand this, first thing, let's figure out what is inheritance and why do we need inheritance in real life. If you're given a question in interviews, remember, as we saw in the previous session, interviewers don't ask definition of interviews or definition of inheritance. They don't ask what is the definition of how do you define it. They don't ask the textbook paragraph in terms of definition. They would rather want to ask if you have understood the concept of inheritance and can you explain that or can you implement it in real life if required. To understand this or to answer this, we need to figure out what sort of questions can be asked. So one thing, where do we use inheritance in real life? Give an example. Rather than where, most often ask, why do we use inheritance in real life? With an example. Now, I hope everybody knows what inheritance is. It's just reusability of code. So I'll just give you one example to understand this. Let's say I have a class called bank account. Now, of course, I'm taking only bank account classes right now for us to understand in detail. But over time, we'll see different examples. But the best example for us to learn from basics, from scratch right now, let us keep it to this. In our case, to begin with, take this for instance. Let's say we have a public function called, let's say, void calculate interest. Instead of calculate interest, let me just make it int calculate interest, where the input can be something like you're giving some, let's say, float interest rate, and you're calculating the interest here in some statements. Or there may be one more function here called int check balance, where since I'm providing the value as int, it will return the balance. Or you can also just make it void, where you're printing the interest over here. So also you can have one more function called int check balance, which basically shows what is the balance to you. And you can have many other functions as well. Also, I'll create one more thing called void create account. And let's say we have certain statements even here. Now, I know I'm taking a little larger program, a lengthier program slightly, but I'm not writing any statements in this. I'm just taking a skeleton of this code for you guys to just understand what it is, how it works, so that we can get to know how to solve or how to answer when such questions particularly are asked. That is, where are you going to use this in real life? Explain with an example. So let's say this is bank account. We have a lot of these functions. Now, everybody knows that there are multiple types of bank accounts. You have a particular class called savings account. You also have, let's say, current account. So one is used for business purposes, the other is used for personal savings purposes, and so on. Now here, calculating interest is same, whether you calculate it in savings account or current account. Interest is calculated using the same formula. Let's assume for now. Let's not go into the concepts within banking. Let's assume that savings account and interest current account balance is calculated in the, or sorry, interest is calculated in the exact same way. If it is calculated in the exact same way, and we have already written that code here, let's assume it's 20-30 lines long, we have already written it here. Do I need to write it separately in savings and current account classes again? Do I need to write this function, the same statements? Calculate interest is same, whichever type of account I use. Let's assume that. If that is the case, do I need to write all the statements of this function separately here in savings account and separately here in current account class? Or can I just inherit this bank account. When I say inherit, I mean I'm getting all the properties of bank account to my savings account class. Similarly, I can get all the properties of my bank account to current account class as well. So once I get them to these two classes, I will be then able to utilize them directly here. So all I need to write here is colon public bank account. So to inherit a class, inherit means to get all the functions and variables of a class into another class. All we need to write is just colon followed by either public, private, or protected. There are three types of access modifiers you can use within this. I'll be explaining each one of them in detail to you guys. For now, just remember it can be public, private, or protected. You just have to inherit it. If you have inherited this class, you can access all the functions of this class here as well. So I don't need to write calculate interest separately again. When I create a savings account, for example, savings account, let's say SA for instance, if I've created it and I need to, let's say, calculate interest, all I'll do is just call SA dot calculate interest with some interest rate like 10 or 10.5, whatever it is. So if I call this, of course, there's no calculate interest over here in savings account. It's there in bank account, but we are inheriting this. So I can access it even from the object here. Same thing goes for current account as well. If I just inherit bank account here, even if I have a current account object, let's call it as CA, I can perform the same function because that's also inheriting bank account. Check balance also, it's the same thing. Whichever kind of account you have, the balance, whatever is available only will be shown. It's not that it's going to calculate something else. So that also you can say basically same thing. You can use same function here also to directly call check balance. But the difference here comes when it is create account. Because savings account, let's say it may have a separate method to create an account. Current account, let's say it has a separate procedure or method to create an account. In that case, you will need to write create account as a separate function here. So when you do this, if you call create account from savings account object, it's going to call this function. If you call the same from current account object, it's going to call this function. That's the basic difference. So I hope this sounds pretty simple and easy for us to understand basically why and where we use inheritance in real life. So I hope this is pretty simple and easy to understand. So I'll just give this code for instance, just just for the reference purpose, nothing else. So as I was stating back here, there are multiple access specifiers that you can use here. You can use private inheritance, you can use protected inheritance, and you can use public inheritance. So what's the difference between these three? What exactly is the difference? So the basic idea here is, all right, so I'll just explain this. So the basic idea here is when you work through private inheritance, if you have, again, I'll just use a couple of terms here. The class from which you inherit. We are inheriting all these functions from this class, from the class called bank account. The class from which we inherit them is called base class or superclass. The class in which we inherit is called subclass, child class, or There are multiple words for the same. So just remember, you can have base class, superclass, or parent class as it's called. And the class in which you inherit is called subclass, and child class regularly. So there are multiple terms that you can use. You can also call it as derived class as well. So there are multiple words that we can use, but let us now focus on this. When it is private inheritance, everything in base class is not inherited to derived class. Whether it's private, protected, or public, everything in base class is not inherited in derived class. So if in interview they just ask, what is private, protected, and public inheritance? Just remember, this only exists in C++, not in Java. In Java, there is no concept of private, protected, and public inheritance. It works entirely differently. We'll go through that in time. But for now, let's just look at this. So base class, if we have something like something private in base class, protected in base class, and public in base class. So I'm just going to give you guys a very neat trick to always remember this. Even for interviews, you guys can just state this very easily. Can I inherit anything private in base class? Remember, the concept of base class private means it's not accessible outside the class. So whatever is private in base class, it is inaccessible in derived class. Anything that's private in base class, you can't access it in derived class whatsoever. Then anything that is protected in base class always remains protected in derived class. Whether it's private inheritance, protected inheritance. So whether it is private, protected, or public inheritance, whatever is protected in base class always remains protected even in the derived class. Now finally, when it comes to public, if it's private inheritance, whatever is public in base class is private in derived class. If it's protected inheritance, whatever is public in base class becomes protected in derived class. If it's public inheritance, whatever is public in base class becomes public itself in derived class. That's the whole difference. Private is always inaccessible, protected always remains protected. Only public changes to either private, protected, or public depending on the type of inheritance. So whatever public I have here, since I have public inheritance, these functions are also public in my derived class. Since they're public in derived class, I can access them using the object. So if you want to access base class functions, I'll just repeat this. If you would want to access base class functions in using derived class objects, you need to make it public. As long as they're public, if you want to access it with objects, you must make it public only, because only in public inheritance will public be public in base class and derived class as well. If it's public in derived class, you can access it using objects. Protected, you can't access using objects. This is just a basic concept we need to know when it comes down to inheritance. We'll go deep within inheritance further on. Yes, it's just basic concepts. It's not everything about this. We will go in depth within this. Not to worry. We'll go in depth and learn a lot more. But before we end up doing that, so I have one question. What is the use of protected? All right, let's try answering this. Let's see where exactly protected is used, or why would it be used. Say for example, now since this is clear, I'll just take a simpler example. Let's say we create something called secondary user. Let's just say secondary user can only do certain things in an account. Primary user will be the one who can perform all transactions and everything. So secondary user should not be able to perform some things. Secondary user should not be able to uh, perform or access certain features. So when you have a class called secondary user who should not access anything here, you can limit their access by making it either private inheritance or protected inheritance, so they can't use any functions, or you can also limit them particularly by using private inheritance. I'll just give you one example. If I have a secondary user and it is private bank account, we're inheriting it privately. That means all these functions can only be accessed within this class. You can't access them outside this class using the object. Using the object, you can have limited set of functions only you can perform. So all of these are possible. But what's the use of protected? For protected, you need to understand different types of inheritance. Once you get to know different types of inheritance, you'll get to understand that better, which we'll learn in time. We'll still just remember going through the very basics of inheritance. In a little while, we'll be going through all of these in detail, not to worry. Now, let's go ahead from here for now. Followed by this. Again, I'll just like to point out one little thing. We only went through type of inheritance in terms of private, protected, and public. That is, in terms of the access specifier. We have not gone through another type of types, another classification in types of inheritance, which we will go through in short amount of time. Let us now go on through polymorphism and let's quickly learn up what exactly it is. So, as the name simply suggests, poly means multiple, morph means forms. So one thing existing in multiple forms is basically polymorphism. That's all there is to it. So one entity existing in multiple forms in a program is called polymorphism. Now, if one entity exists in multiple forms during compile time and run time, during compile time and run time, it is called compile time polymorphism. Now, on the other hand, when one entity exists in multiple forms only during runtime, that one entity does not exist in multiple forms during compile time. It only exists in multiple forms during runtime. You call it as runtime polymorphism. That's the only difference you need to know with this. For now, to begin with, that is the only difference we need to know. So we'll go in detail and understand what sort of questions you can possibly expect out of all of these. But now, let's go ahead and learn a few different concepts in classes and objects in object oriented programming that we essentially need to know when it comes down to object oriented programming in C++ particularly. Now, the first, in C++, you have multiple types of functions in a class. So I'll just point this out without taking too much time. I'll just go back to our simple example stating we are creating a class called class A. Let's just create an object, or let's forget this for now. Let's say in class A, we have a function. Let's say void print of, let's say cout. A will just print A and end the program. Now, of course, we need a private variable. Let's take int A equals 50. Now, all that we are doing here is pretty simple. Just creating an object, and we're just calling, instead of object as A, because we have variable also as A, we'll call this as var so that nobody gets confused. So we'll just create an object A and I'll just call A dot print. Now it's pretty clear to everyone what the output will be here. We've got a variable whose value is 50. We're printing the same here. Simple, done. But one thing you guys need to know here, in this case, this function is a part of the class. Sometimes you may need to create functions which are not part of the class. Even though it's not a part of the class, you may need to create some functions elsewhere so that you're not creating objects of the class, but you're still accessing variables of the objects. To do this is the basic idea. You can create a function called friend function. The concept of friend function is it's a function which is not a part of the class. I'll just point out right away, it's not a part of the class, but it can access all the private, protected, and public variables of the class. This is the basic idea of a friend function. It's a function which is not a part of the class. So I need to write the function outside the class somewhere. So instead of writing void print here, I need to write it outside the function, outside the class. But we know that this is private. Since it is private, we can't access it outside the class whatsoever. But there's a way to do that. That is using friend function in C++. Now, let's just look at how it works in short with a very small example, and then we'll go through a real case scenario, or we'll learn where exactly we will be using it in a real life. Now, here's the basic point. A friend function, let's say for instance, will be created like this. But remember, you have to specify that this function is a friend of this class. To specify that print is a friend of the class, you need to specify here that void print as just a definition or declaration. We generally call this as function prototype. This is your definition of the function. This is your function prototype. The function prototype must be written within the class. Along with that, you should also write that this is a friend function. So this is how you get to know that print is a friend of class A. Now, once you've done this, all you need to do here, I'll just quickly point this out. All you need to do here is in your function, you need to also just specify that the function that you have here, you don't need to write friend here again. Please note, this is all that you're writing. Prototype of the function with the keyword friend behind it. You're not writing friend over here. Now, let us see if this works. So I'm just going to call a.print. Now, I'm just showing you the execution also so that you guys are familiar with it. In case they ask, what is a friend function? How do you define it? Can you give me a real example for the same? So you should know how to define it, because friend function defining has some peculiar features that you must implement. So that is basically what we will look at right now. So take this for instance, you have a variable var, let's say in our case. So all that we are doing here is calling a.print. Now a is the object, print is supposed to be function of the class that we are calling. Is print a function of the class? No, it's not. Since it's not a function of the class, this will give you error. You can't access a function of a friend function using object like this, because this is not a function of the class. Objects can only access function of the class, not friend functions. Instead, whenever you call friend functions, you need to send object name within them. So if I'm sending object name within it, I need to receive object name here. So if you observe, we are sending object name, we should receive object name. So in the last session, we saw how we can send and receive object names using, or how we can send and receive variables using references. So same thing we're going to do here. We're going to use a reference called object to receive the object name. Now when I receive it, I can access it by using object.var. So all that we are doing here, I'll just point this out in short so that everyone can get to know this. We have an object of class A. We're just calling print function from class A, not from class A. We're sending object A as a parameter within print function. Once it goes to the parameter, we are receiving it as object. Now we know if A points to some memory location, the object called object also points to the same memory location. In this case, when both of them point to same memory location, I can either use a.var in this set of brackets or object.var in this set of brackets. When I use it, even though it's private, since this function is a friend of your class, you will be able to access it. There's still one problem here though. In class, you have said that print function is a part of your, is a friend of class which does not have any arguments. But here you have written one argument. So number of arguments differ from here to here. So your class thinks that this is not a friend of your class. So this should not be able to access private variable. If you want to access private variable, you have to ensure that the arguments are same here as well as here. So let us update the same here. We get this particular statement. So this is your simple example of friend function. Now, why exactly do we need this? Why exactly do we require this? The simple idea is there are a lot of things you may need to keep as secretive or confidential. So, to ensure that some things are kept secretive or confidential, you can have friend functions where only certain private information will be shared through friend function. Every information should not be shared. So the idea is, if you give access to private data, if you give access to private data of a class in some way possible, then user can access any part of the private data. So here in the function, you're limiting the access to private data and ensuring only that is provided. So in real life, you share certain secretive things only with your friends. So the same thing goes even here. So as a question, there is like bank balance should be private. We need to use for calculation, so we can't use. So we can use friend function. Absolutely, that is also possible. So one example, as pointed out, is that since bank balance is private, you can create a friend function for simple calculations like simple interests. So for simple interest, whichever object goes here, that object will perform calculation only for the variable of that object and exit. So a lot of such things can be done. So the basic idea is that friend functions allow you to access private, protected, and public data of an object without being a part of a class. So in future, you want to add one more function, you can directly add it separately like this or any such way. That's completely up to you. So this is the basic usage of friend function. Now, I'll just give one more instance. Let's say, for example, you're creating a linked list. I'm just giving this one example so everyone can easily understand. Let's say we create a class called a linked list, where you can create many objects, linked list objects. Now in linked list objects, let's say for instance, one linked list can search for element in another linked list, can search, but one linked list cannot insert elements in another linked list. It can only search. If I have access to A2, I can search whether a particular linked element is there in A1, but I can't delete it. Let's say, for example, I can't insert it or delete elements here. So that is generally done by using the friend function called search. So A2 can search elements in A1 as well. So that is the basic idea of how it works. So you can send the name of the object. I'm just pointing out. You can send the name of any object that you want, and you can search or you can perform any function within this. This is the basic idea of friend functions. So going ahead from the concept of friend functions, let us go on to the next part now and look at what other kinds of basic questions that you can possibly expect within this. Now let's go through one of the most basic things that we need to know here, that is constructors and destructors. So let's just go ahead with this little concept as to what exactly is a constructor and what exactly is a destructor. A constructor basically is a function which is always called or which is always executed the moment an object is created. A destructor is a function which is always executed the moment an object is destroyed, or in other words, deleted. So that's basically the difference. Now, one thing everybody needs to know is C++ has destructors, whereas Java does not have destructors. Java instead has an inbuilt method to remove variables or to remove data from classes or to remove data from objects, in other words. So the basic idea here, let's just take one simple example to just work through this and look at what sort of questions we can expect from this. So just remember, what is the difference in constructors and destructors? One executes at the moment object is created, the other executes the moment an object is destroyed. Now why do we need constructors and destructors? As always, in an interview like this, it's a basically face-to-face interview. You're supposed to answer questions that are asked to you, so you're gonna expect questions more on reality based, more on concepts where you're supposed to answer by linking it to real world rather than just definitions. So why do we need constructors? Why do we need destructors? I'm just going to take one example. Let's say we have created a bank account. I'm just going to take the same example earlier. Let me see if I can undo all of this and go back to the bank account example very quickly. Perfect. So let's say we have a bank account. Now, a couple of things you should always know, a few rules. Constructor should always have same name as the class name, and constructor should have no return type. There should be no return type of a constructor. It should have same name as the class name. It can have, there can be multiple types of constructors. If you figure out, there are three types of constructors that are called default, parameterized, and copy constructor. There are these are the three types of constructors we have. I'm not going to go in detail within them right now. Let's just for now learn the rules and immediately go for real life example. So followed by these three: same name as class name, no return type, default parameters, copy constructors are there. And constructors are always executed the moment object is created. This much we know completely. There can be multiple constructors, but only one is called for each object. Now, let's take a constructor called bank account. Now, what we will do in this constructor is the moment a person wants to create a bank account, let's call it as B. What's the first thing they do? They create a bank account. In other words, the moment you want to create a bank account, you need to enter your details. You need to enter your details like your Aadhaar number, PAN card, and all these sort of details. You need to enter all of these. So using that, we can call create account, or instead, we can just create the object. The moment object is created, it will call constructor automatically. In this constructor, you can write steps to create a bank account. So, isn't this slightly easier for us? Of course, it is. That's the major reason why it is used. Similarly, when the bank account is to be removed, let's say we call the destructor. Destructor is just with a negation followed by the rest being the same thing. Now, here, steps to delete a bank account. That's basically it. So here we are creating a bank account, and here we are deleting a bank account. That's the basic criteria as of now. So the moment your program starts, it keeps running. The moment you want to delete it, you either the program ends, or you can delete an object manually as well. So this is how we can have certain specific functions that should execute the moment an object is created and the moment an object is destroyed. So this is just one little example that I'm taking up. Now let's say if user has only Aadhaar card number or only PAN card number, or user wants to create bank account with certain requirements. Let's say if it's a salaried account, balance minimum initial balance will be zero. Monthly average balance can be zero as well. So for just a bank account, if you're just creating a salaried account, you can have zero balance. Or let's say if you want to create a specific account with a minimum monthly balance, so you can have something like bank account with an FD for a minimum balance. You want to create an FD for a minimum balance the moment you create a bank account. So in that case, you can have something like bank account space B2. Let's just call it as B1. Now here you're sending a minimum FD amount. For example, fixed deposit amount. Let's call it as 10,000. So the moment you create a bank account with 10,000 as FD, it won't go to this function anymore. We need to receive that integer variable here. So we're going to receive it as int fixed deposit account or fixed deposit amount, for example. So whatever is the value here, that will be taken here to fixed deposit account, and this constructor will be called. So if this first line, or if this object is created B1, it's going to go, let's say, to salaried accounts. If B2 is created, let's say it's going to go to fixed deposit account. So like this, you guys can give real case examples, and I will always state, I'll state this right now as well, but I'll always state in real cases, in interviews, I would always suggest you to explain with examples of bank account, as it is the best way. I'll just point this out. It is the best way to provide examples in interviews. Always the best way. So always stick to these. So let's move ahead from here. Now, going ahead from here, since we got to know the basic concept of constructors and destructors, and why they are used in real life, how they are used, we got to know what is default constructor. Default constructor is where you don't send any parameters. Parameters constructor is where you send a parameter. Let's say My friend creates an account with 10,000 FD and I want to create the same account as well, exact same features. All I'm going to do is, or let's say you want to transfer an account to one more account or anything like that. So you can just do B3 equals B2. So what this does is it will copy everything of object B2 to object B3. So this is called copy constructor. Now there are two types of them. If in interviews they ask at any type point of time, what is constructor, how do they work? This is the basic thing you guys just need to state. A constructor has same name as class name. It's got no return type. It always executes the moment an object is created. In real cases, you can take a simple example of bank account. The moment a bank account object is created, it should create the bank account and perform the steps to create the bank account. That can be written within a constructor. Now, there are three types of them. Default, parameterized, copy. You guys already know default and parameterized. Copy constructor, there are two types of them. That is a default copy constructor and a user defined copy constructors. They're also called deep and shallow copy constructors as well. But for now, default copy constructors. They copy everything about an object to the second object. They copy everything from one object to the second object automatically. They copy it bit by bit. Every bit is copied. So that's why it's called bit by bit copying. Whereas if you create a customized or user defined copy constructor, let's take this for example, user defined copy constructors don't copy anything by default. It's user defined. You need to define what to copy. This is where you need to define what is to be copied. That is, you need to define which variable, or in other words, which field is to be copied. So we also call this as field by field copy. So we got to know how default copy constructor works. B2 is automatically copied to B3. So whatever variables B2 has, those variable values B3 will also have. They're automatically copied. You can write it as B3 equals B2, or you can write it as B3 of B2. Both have the same meaning. Both have the exact same meaning. Now, apart from this, there's another way to do this. You can create your own copy constructor. To create your own copy constructor, since you're copying an object to another object, you need to receive the object in the constructor. So we have already received the object in a function before, that was friend function. Same thing we're going to do here. We're going to receive it in the object. We're going to receive the object in the function here as well. So I'll call the object as of type bank account. Let's just take a reference object called ampersand object. So when I write bank account B3 equals B2, B2 will be sent here as object. Let's say we have a variable private. Let's call it as float balance equals 50,000.75. Let's say, for example. Now, in this case, again, let's not take it as, yeah, let it be private for our instance. Since we are just taking an example to understand it, let's say all that we are doing here is copying B2 to B3. If you don't have a copy constructor, by default, whatever is of B2 that is balance will be copied to B3 as well. If you create a copy constructor, it won't get copied. It won't get copied. Instead, whatever is the default value here, that remains in B3. Default value here is 50,000.75 itself. But let's not worry about that. In our case, when everything you're having from B2 copied over to B3, all that we're going to do over here is just specify that in our case, the object B2 is here, which is going over to, or which is received here as the variable object. Whereas here, object B3 is available And do we know how B3 is received in this constructor? Because we know how B2 is received in this constructor. B2 is sent as a parameter. We are explicitly receiving that parameter as object. So remember, object is B3 in this case. I'm only considering, sorry, object is B2 in this case. Apologies. Object is B2 in this case. So the object B2 is explicitly sent. As I stated, this is same as writing B3 brackets B2. So the object from which you need to copy is explicitly received. What about the object to which we copy? How is that received here? Remember, there's a default value by which we receive it. What is the default value? If B3 is the object calling this function, address of B3 is automatically sent and stored in a pointer called this. So if you want to update anything about B3, all you need to do is use this arrow mark variable name. So this here, this represents the object here whose address is sent. So this arrow mark variable will represent variable of B3. If you want to copy something of B2 to it, since B2 is stored in the variable object, you can store it with object dot variable. So I hope this is clear. Remember, object is a reference, that's why I'm using dot operator. Whereas this is a pointer, that's why I'm using arrow mark in this case. So let's go ahead from here. So now moving ahead, since we got to know how basically constructors work and how destructors work, and we also got to know all these basic concepts and basic things about C++, that is particularly when it comes down to, I'll just point this out, when it comes down to creation of objects, basic functions, and so on, let us now directly go on to inheritance and polymorphism in depth. So, as we expect, in inheritance, you can expect a few questions, and so can you in polymorphism. So, first I'll go through polymorphism and then I'll go through inheritance. So, first thing, when it comes down to polymorphism, as we learned earlier on, there are two types. One is called compile time polymorphism, and the other run time polymorphism. Now, as we learned earlier, polymorphism basically means that you have one entity which can exist in multiple forms. Now, if one entity exists in multiple forms, during compiling of the program itself, it's called compile time polymorphism. If one entity does not exist in multiple forms during compile time, but only when the program is about to run, that is when we call it as runtime polymorphism. That's the basic difference. Now, to understand that here, let's just take this previous example. So, in this particular example, if you observe, we have written two functions with the same name. Two functions have same name and they have no return type. They have no return type. Let's not worry about that for now. But we need return type. Yes, in regular functions, we need return type, but there are no return type here. Agreed. So two functions have the same name, no return type. The return type is also, you can say, basically same here since there are no return type. Let's assume that. Then we should not be able to create both these functions. We should only be able to create one of them. But the reason we are able to create both is because the parameters are different in both functions. So compile time polymorphism is basically where you can see here that you have two functions with same name, same return type, let's assume, but different parameters, and they exist. So basically, one thing is existing in multiple forms. This one function name is existing in multiple forms in a single class. That is what is basically called compile time polymorphism. During compile time, see, the moment you create the program and compile, the moment you compile the program, both these functions are already there. Since they are already there during compile time, it's called compile time polymorphism. That's basically it. If one of them is not there during compile time and they suddenly come up during run time, then it's called a runtime polymorphism. I'll explain how that happens over time. But for now, let's focus on compile time polymorphism. So here in this basic concept, it can be implemented in multiple ways. So compile time polymorphism is often also implemented using a particular method called, a particular way called method overloading. Now functions are also called methods in C++. Every class has functions, or in other words, you can say every class has methods. So compile time polymorphism is often implemented using something called method overloading. Let's figure out what exactly this is. Method overloading is where you have multiple functions within a class have same name, same return type. So they're basically same thing but multiple forms. Then if they're same thing, for them to exist in multiple forms, there should be at least one difference. That at least one difference is different parameters or different type of parameters. This is all there is there. The name is same, return type is same, only the parameters are different, different number of parameters or different type of parameters. That's all, nothing else to it. I'll just take a simple example. Let's not take too much time within this. Let's say we have void fun, a set of statements here. Let's say we have void fun with where we send an integer with a set of statements here. Let's say we have void fun with let's say a float, or let's say two integers, or let's say an integer and string b. I'm just going to explain why integer and string for now. For now I'll explain this, but for now let's just remember this. We have an integer, we have an integer and a string, and let's say we also have void fun of only a string. Now let's say you're off to create a bank account. Now when you're off to create a bank account, you can have your create account function, and let's say I'll call this as, instead of a, I'll call this as other, instead of b, I'll call this as pan for our easier understanding, so that we are not confused. So in this case, when you create your bank account, let's say you don't have Aadhaar card or PAN card. Let's say you're telling them that I'll bring it later on because I don't have a physical copy of it. But please process rest of my bank account creation statements or process or steps. So then this particular function is called, where they're not sending Aadhaar card or PAN card over here. Now let's say the next thing, they are sending an Aadhaar card over here, and it will call the second function where Aadhaar card is sent, but you don't have PAN card details. Or the third function, in case you have both, this particular function is called and the entire steps are completed. Or in case you have only PAN card, whatever steps are required for PAN card are completed, the rest are remaining. So based on this, you can call different functions. And remember, all these functions have the same name. They just differ in the number of parameters or the type of parameters. Here number of parameters is 0, here it is 1, here it is 2. Whereas here and here, the type of parameter is different. The type of parameter here is integer, the type of parameter here is string. So with this basic idea, all that we need to know now is compile time polymorphism just has multiple functions with same name, same return type, but different parameters. Now, it cannot be just functions. You can even do it for operators. I'll just give you one examples. I'll just give you a couple of small examples, just very quickly to do this, because method overloading can also be done. Similarly, operator overloading can also be done in compile time polymorphism. So when you talk about operator overloading, one operator exists in multiple forms. Let's say, for example, very quickly, without much of a delay, we'll remove the class details here. Let's say we create a string s1 equals hello, or let's just say string s1 equals um, ama, and string s2 equals zing. Now here, when you perform string s3 equals s1 plus s2, and if you print s3, let's see what exactly happens. Let's just try it out. So let's say I just compile this code again. One minor thing we need to know: whenever you're using string, just use hash include string as well. So now let's just compile this code, and the moment we have compiled it, let's just execute it quickly. You'll observe that it's adding the string. So you don't need return zero particularly. See, every statement by default, almost every statement by default returns some value. Cout also returns some integer. That integer itself is taken here. If you want to do it separately, yes, you can also ensure return any number. But here, cout will automatically return an integer number. You guys can check out by googling what number does cout return. There's a reason, there's a story behind it. It's a nice thing, but it's not required for our interviews. So let's not focus on that. So here, when we add them, we basically get a combination of string. Now let me do something similar. I'll take int x equals. Now here I'll give 25 plus 25. Now, when I print x on the other hand, you guys can easily observe that the output expected in both are different. Operator is same. Operator in both statement line numbers 8 and 9 are same. In line number 8, you're performing S1 plus S2. In line number 9, you're performing 25 plus 25. Operator is same, which is plus, but depending on the value around them, they behave differently. They have multiple forms depending on what is the value around them. This is a very, very simple example to understand how compile time polymorphism works with operator overloading. So I hope this is simple and easy to understand for us as well. So going ahead from this, let's copy this for your reference in case you require later on. So followed by this, now let's go to the next one, that is runtime polymorphism. Now the idea here is two or more entities exist in multiple forms during runtime and not at all during compile time. They exist in multiple forms only during runtime. Only. Now, to understand how, or for us to know how they exist only during runtime, we need to learn something new here. That is a keyword called virtual. So there's a new keyword that is implemented in C++ called virtual keyword. And here's basically what it means. A virtual keyword is just a replacement keyword. I'll just point it out. It's just a replacement keyword. Here are the basic things you need to know about it and the rules that you need to know regarding this. So generally what happens is a virtual function is placed in base class. This is generally what we do. It's placed in base class, and this virtual function in base class, we're particularly talking about in base class, is called when object in derived class accesses the function given a condition when it is pointed to by base pointer. Now this may be slightly confusing, not to worry about it. I'll explain this in detail. But for now, just remember this. When a function is specified as function is specified as virtual function is a part of the class only during run time. It's not a part of the class during compile time. So the basic idea here, I'll just point this out. Virtual function is only a part of the class during run time, not a part during compile time. So I'm just taking one example here just for us to understand, because runtime polymorphism takes a little time for us to understand this in short. So I'm just going to take one small example. Let's take a class A and let's make a public function here called void fun, where we're just printing in fun slash n. Now, if I make this virtual, it only exists during runtime. It doesn't exist during compile time. So all that I'm doing here is creating an object of class A, and I'm calling a.fun. Pretty simple program. Now, first thing I'm going to do is remove this virtual keyword. Let's see what happens if I remove the virtual keyword and run it. Now, of course, I've missed out the semicolon here. Let's add the semicolon. Perfect. Now, let's try running this. So again, I have not using namespace standard. Let's add that as well. Let's now run it, compile and run it. It prints in fun. Now, all that we're going to do is just add virtual keyword to this. The moment you compile and run this, you still get in fun, because when you're running it during runtime, this function is there. You are able to access it. But the point here is, whenever a function is virtual, it is part of the class only during runtime. It is part of the class only during runtime, not during compile time. To understand this, there's a simple way to do it. We'll create a base class as well as a derived class, both having the same function called void fun. Only the base class function will be virtual. Derived class function will not be virtual. Now, derived class, let's inherit base class here. Now, here's the basic thing you guys need to know. In this case, base class function is virtual, but derived class function is not. So when you create an object, let's create a pointer to base class. I'll just call it as base star b, and let's create an object to derived class. Let's have the base pointer point to derived class address, and let's call fun from base class. This is all that we're doing. Sounds simple, not difficult at all. So the idea here is, I'll just point this out. So I hope you guys can go through this, check this out later also if you need to understand. A base pointer is created. The moment a base pointer is created, just remember, the moment a pointer to a class is created, it will point to the function of that class itself. Because remember what I told earlier, functions belong to classes. So the moment base pointer is created, it will automatically point to function of base class. So you're creating a derived object has an address. That address you're storing in base pointer. Even though base pointer is storing address of derived object, it will not go to derived class function because it has already linked with base class function during compile time. I'll repeat, during compile time. So that is why when you call fun, it's not going to go for derived class function at all. It will go for base class function. To understand that clearly, I'll call it as in fun1 and in fun2. You guys will get to see that the output will be in fun1, not in fun2. If you wanted to point to fun2, what you need to do here is make this virtual. And I'll just point out, what does virtual mean? The function is not a part of the class at compile time. So at compile time, do we have two functions called fun? No, we don't have two functions called fun in compile time. It's only there at run time because virtual keyword adds this function to this class only during run time. So it's not there at compile time. So when this pointer tries to access the functions here at compile time, it can't find it. So that is why it will go to function of derived class. But when the program starts to run, then you have this function which can be accessed by object of base class but not pointer of base class. So this function exists in two forms during runtime, but it only exists in one form during compile time. That is not this. That is why it is called a runtime polymorphism. When I use virtual, now the output should be in fun too. So this is the basic concept of a runtime polymorphism. So if you get a question regarding this, just remember two or more entities exist during runtime but not during compile time. And this is how it is generally created using virtual function. So from here, let us now move ahead. In the next session, we'll look at inheritance and then we'll go on to Java, all the important questions you can expect in Java. There are a lot of them because followed by C++, Java is the most important part because in the last session, as I've stated, most companies, including Wipro as well, hire Angular developers, or in other words, hire full stack developers. As a full stack developer, you need to know about Java well. You need to know about object oriented programming well in Java, particularly. So, we're going to go through that in detail in the coming session. So, we'll catch up in the next session, guys. Have a good time. So, I hope you guys were able to understand it easily, quickly. I'll just share the link, guys. I totally forgot the same. I'll just share the link over for your reference so that you guys can access it later on. So you guys can just let me know whether this was easy enough now. Object-oriented programming questions that you may expect. Is it easy enough or is it too difficult even now? Like, I'm not talking about coding perspective. I'm not talking about anything with respect to coding. Only from interview perspective in the face-to-face interviews. I hope it has become a little easier, at least for you. Thank you for the nice feedback as always. We'll catch up in the next session, guys. Have a good time. At Magesh's question, yes, I can suggest a few websites particularly. The best websites that I would suggest, I will link them. I have a file with a link of them. I will share them together by tomorrow's session. The whole link, the whole list of websites. I'll be sharing it over chat for you so that you can access it in the next session. I hope that is all right. All right. All right. Thank you guys. Have a good time.